Okay, let's spend some time continuing on the journey toward my having 2 spinal fusion surgeries in 3 days. Part 1 is ended with my having a laminectomy. And it worked pretty good. By February of 2016, I was pretty much pain-free for about a year. And then in the spring of 2017, I was walking my husky down Woodlawn Avenue right there, and all of a sudden I got a pain in my side, right in the side of the hip, and wham, and I knew what it was. I mean, I hoped it wasn't the same thing, but then I went a couple of blocks, and then it got so bad I had to say, pain break, and Leah remembered what pain break meant from the previous year and came to a stop, and I sat down on a retaining wall, and the pain subsided, and I got up and tried it again, and I got a couple of blocks down, the pain started coming up again, and then within another couple of blocks, it was so bad I had to sit down again and do another pain break. And within a few days, those couple of blocks got to be 1 block. I could go about a block, pain would start. I'd go another block, it'd be so bad I'd have to sit. So back to the neurosurgeon. Everything that was going on with that pain down the leg was happening because of what was happening in my lower back. I have at least 3 things going on in my back. The first is stenosis, and it's the stenosis that's causing the pain down the leg. This is a side view of a spine, and it shows what's going on with the spine that causes the pain. The green circle shows the malformation of part of the spine, the growing of bone spurs. You can compare it to the comparable part of the spine to the left, and you can see how that in the circle is deformed and pressing against those yellow nerves because of that deformity. Those areas in red are the inflammation, represent the inflammation of the yellow nerves, and that's what's causing the pain. In addition to those malformations and the bone spurs and stuff in the vertebra itself, you have the disc, which is represented by the gray space. The disc separates the vertebra and keeps space open so that the nerves can come out and go down to the spine. But over time, the disc can compress and reduce the space between the vertebrae, which means that those yellow nerves are getting pressed on as that space is reduced. The gray area of the disc also can herniate, and you can see the little bulb on the upper right-hand side of that where the purple arrow is pointing to, and that's the disc goop that's in the middle of the disc coming out and into the spinal canal and pressing against the nerves. So that's the stenosis that causes that pain down the legs and the hip and so on. Now, the second thing that I have is scoliosis. This is an x-ray of my spine before the surgery, and you can see that the yellow line represents what the path the spine should take, but in my case, it follows the red line or curves over to the left, and having that curve causes pain as well. Now, one thing you might notice in this x-ray too, those light blue lines are pointing to vertebrae, and you can see those are pretty well formed, and you still got some pretty good space between them for those nerves to come out of. But look down at in the blue circle. That's the bottom part of my lumbar spine, and boy, what a mess that is. There's no space between the vertebrae, and the vertebrae are just a mess. And that's where my pain is emanating, coming down my legs. So that's the scoliosis, or the curve of the spine. And then the third item that I have, or the third disorder, is hypolodorsis is the official name. It's also called flat back. That's when your back loses the normal curve that a back has. You can see the yellow line is the curve that a back should have. My back follows the red line. And that hypolodorsis, or flat back, is also a producer of pain. So those are the issues that I have that's causing my pain. So back to the neurosurgeon. Now, this time she said she didn't think more surgery would help, so she sent me to have some injections. they don't do anything to cure your problem. It doesn't change the structure of the spine. What these injections do is bathe the nerves that are irritated and inflamed with steroids. And those steroids reduce the inflammation, and theoretically, that reduces the pain. Now, I got the shot, and when I got home, like the next day, I thought, it feels a little better. And I don't know, maybe it is, maybe. And then I decided if you got to work that hard to know whether this is working or not, then it's probably not working. So I went back 3 weeks later for the scheduled follow-up, and I said it didn't really work. So he gave me another one from another approach, and that didn't do anything. So I went back 3 weeks later for a follow-up and said it didn't work. And so he gave me a third approach, and that did jack diddly. So when I went back to that follow-up, he said, well, there's really nothing else for you. Now, these injections can have some pretty significant side effects, so they won't do more than 4 in a year, and the efficacy of them are really iffy. You can find a lot of studies like this one that say they work pretty good, but then you can find a lot of studies like this one that say they don't do much at all. They must do something because they keep giving them, but they didn't work for me. So I was back to my neurosurgeon, and this time she sent me for another round of physical therapy. Now, I love physical therapy, and I love physical therapists, but I'm not real fond of this, where you're in a big group in a room, and the physical therapist is working with you and several other people in the room. So what the physical therapist does is tell you to do an exercise and then leaves to work with everybody else while you do your reps of that exercise. The thing is, I never knew whether I was really doing it right or not. And then I would finish my 10 reps, and I have to sit there and wait for the physical therapist to come back and then tell me to do another one. And I have faith that even that physical therapy did some good, but it didn't take the pain away in any significant way whatsoever. And I did find a much, much better way to do physical therapy later, and I'm going to tell you about that. Now, I'm going to tell you more about this neurosurgeon in part 3 of this 4-part series, but first I need to tell you about my primary care physician who had been helping me with my lower back pain since about 2010. And after this sharp pain from stenosis returned and I didn't have any help from injections or from physical therapy, he came through again. After the pain returned in the spring of 2017, it quickly worsened. And after the physical therapy didn't help much, and after the injections didn't help at all, my primary care physician, seeing the pain I was in, increased my oxycodone until I was taking 60 milligrams a day. And that worked. I could pretty much do whatever I wanted except run. And during the next 4 years, I didn't get tolerant. Let's talk about tolerance for just a moment. Opioid tolerance means that the body gets used to the medication and it doesn't work as well. You have to take more medication in order to have the same pain relief. And it's a real problem, and it's been studied a lot, but they really still don't know what causes it. They think it has something to do with the way the receptors respond to the drug. I saw a study from 2024 that found that cholesterol might have something to do with it, but basically they still don't know yet. I've got the Wyrick theory of tolerance. It came from my studying the Dr. Google School of Medicine and my own experience. What I found was that drug addicts who get put in jail and go through withdrawal, when they come out of jail and they take the same amount of drugs they were taking before going into jail, they often overdose and they often die. As a recovering alcoholic, I've gotten to know a lot of other recovering alcoholics, and a lot of them are cross-addicted and also had drug issues. And those who had problems with pills, when I heard their stories, I was always just amazed at the number of pills that they took. Here's a screenshot from an interaction I had with a long-time recovering and sober addict now. He's graduated from law school, and now he's in a doctoral program. He's going to be doctor lawyer pretty soon. And in an interchange we had, this is what he said he was taking before he got sober. Look at that. It's an amazing amount of pills to take. And I do understand the reason why, because when I take oxycodone, I don't feel much, usually anything, but sometimes I feel a slight mood change that feels kind of relaxing. One day when I was taking a walk, I decided to really pay attention to that. So I took the oxycodone before I started on the walk, and then I paid attention, and at 10 minutes I began to feel that sort of relaxing feeling. I was at Westview and South Lumpkin intersection at that point. And then it was exactly 10 minutes later when I was at Greenwood and Millage Heights that feeling went away. And that told me that's why the pill people I knew took so many pills, because in order to feel what they wanted to feel, they had to take a lot. Anyway, that told me that in order to not get tolerant, you need to change the level of oxycodone that you have in your system. Now, there are two types of pills. There are controlled release and immediate release. And the controlled release slowly lets the medication out so that you have a steady and level amount in your system all the time. The advantage of that is you only have to take 1 or 2 pills a day. Now, it's supposed to be an advantage that you also have a level amount of medication so that your pain doesn't go up and down based on the amount of medication you have. I think that that's a disadvantage when it comes to tolerance. If the addict quickly loses his tolerance when he goes to jail and withdrawals, then maybe we ought to keep the level of medication in our system different all day long. Don't keep the same level of medication in. So I always ask for immediate release oxycodone. So when you take it, it immediately gets, the full amount gets released, and it has a peak effectiveness in about an hour, and then it slowly diminishes. What I found was it might hurt a little more, but I could handle that as long as I knew I was going to get some relief pretty soon when I took my next pill. So I was taking 4 or 15 milligrams a day during the day. And then I wouldn't take any at night. Now, I had the pain at night. I still had that lower backache at night at that time. And so my primary care physician prescribed Ambien for me for nighttime. And I know some of y'all are going, Ambien, oh no, sleepwalking and all that. I never had that issue. I never had any side effects from Ambien. But anyway, for 4 years, I was taking 4 15 milligrams of, or I should say 4 15 milligram tablets of oxycodone during the day, and then Ambien at night. I've asked for increase of pain medication 3 times during this entire many years of experience. And 2 times was during this period I'm talking about now, from 2017 to 2021. The first time had to do with yard work. I did yard work on Monday mornings, and I spent about 4 hours mowing and clipping hedges and raking and doing all that. And I'd take the medication before I started, and the first 2 hours was no problem. And then I would begin to have a lot of pain and began to be harder and harder to do that second 2 hours of yard work. So I asked my primary care physician if he would prescribe a additional dose just on Monday morning so that I would take 15 milligrams of oxycodone before I started, and then take another 15 milligram pill halfway through the yard work, 2 hours. And he agreed to do that. Now, knowing what I know now, I wish he had said, Ed, why don't you split your yard work up and do half of it on Monday and half of it on Tuesday? That never occurred to me. I am my father's son. Get her done. It was an anathema to think of starting something and not finishing it. That's just the way I was raised. But now I would split it up instead of asking for an additional dose. And then the second time that I asked for a dose had to do with this. Yep, you got Clark Griswold here. This is how I like to decorate our house for the holidays. And that took a lot of work. I would start a few days before Thanksgiving so that we could light it up on Thanksgiving evening to start the season. And so I sent an email to my primary care physician and talked about this period of time between Thanksgiving and Christmas. On Thanksgiving Day, I did a lot of the cooking, and that would be very painful. And then I'd decorate the house, and then I would have to undecorate the house. So I asked for 5 additional tablets between Thanksgiving and Christmas, 5 15 milligram tablets that I would use on those days that I was doing all that extra activity. And primary care physician agreed to that. Now, I did ask for an increase one other time, and I'll be talking about that in a little bit. So for about 4 years, I took the oxycodone, and I managed pretty well, and then I screwed up. Really, really screwed up. So So it's the spring of 2021, and we're in the middle of the COVID pandemic. And I know some of y'all, it wasn't a big deal for you, or some of y'all even didn't think it was real. Well, let me tell you, it was very, very real and a very big deal. My sister, just a couple of months before this, had become infected, and she passed away from having COVID. So yeah, it was a big deal for us. And so we were going to make sure that we didn't get infected. And one of the things we did was order groceries and have them delivered. Now, by this time, listening to the experts, I was convinced that the way you got COVID was through aerosols. People who were infected would breathe out the virus, and if you were around them and you breathed it in, that's how you'd get it. And that the droplets that CDC and WHO were still talking about, despite all the evidence of aerosols being the villain, wasn't really the big deal, not the droplets. But we're going to be extra careful. I mean, I was 70 years old. My wife was 71, among the vulnerable population for bad outcomes if you were going to be infected. I had coronary artery disease, one of the comorbidities that was a big deal for bad outcomes too. So when we had our groceries delivered, I'd lay them out and I'd spray them down with bleach. And then I'd put them in a laundry basket. And I would then carry them inside the house. Now, on this day, we had ordered some liters of soda and some milk, a gallon of milk and some other stuff. So when I went to pick up that laundry basket, I stopped. I mean, it was heavy. And I thought, I don't think I ought to pick that up. But then, here's my dad. Get her done. I can get this done. I can do this. And besides, lifting weight's good for you. And I was very careful to lift it, but using my legs and not my back. And it was heavy, but I got it. Now, we live in this, it's a little 3-bedroom ranch. And when our 3 daughters got to a certain age, we decided they ought to live on the main floor and each of them have a bedroom. And my wife and I moved down here to our finished basement, which also has a kitchen. And when our daughters left to go out and live their lives, we just stayed down here in the basement because we like it. So I was going to have to carry this laundry basket, and that's what I did. I carried it across the front porch into the living room, and then into a hallway, and then down stairways, and then a right turn on the stairways, and then another turn through an alcove, and then in a den, another turn, and then into the kitchen. And by the time I got down there, thing was heavy. And as I set it down, I lost my mind. I didn't use my legs. I just bent and I let it go. And when I came up, man, I knew that I had messed up. I mean, I didn't have pain right away, but I felt something, and the next day the pain came. And after 4 years of the 60 milligrams a day of oxycodone allowing me to do pretty much anything I wanted to but run, I was back on a walker, and the pain was severe. And then back to the neurologist, and she said, maybe you herniated a disc, and those things resolve by themselves a lot of times, so let's just wait and see. Meanwhile, I had my appointment with my primary care physician. I saw him every 3 months for him to write. He would write 3 prescriptions for the next 3 months of the oxycodone. And he would have on there a do not fill before this date on those prescriptions. And when I went for that one appointment, primary care physician added 20 milligrams to the 60 of his own volition. I didn't ask for that. But he only made it for 2 weeks, hoping that this laundry basket pain would be temporary. Well, it wasn't temporary. After a couple of weeks, I was still in severe pain. And so I called to make an appointment, as you can see here, with the purpose of that appointment, asking him to extend the 20 milligrams that he had added. Now, because he was going to have to rewrite prescriptions, if he agreed to do that, I suggested what the dosages would be for the new prescriptions. Anyway, for the third and last time, I asked for this increase of oxycodone, and he agreed to that. Now, despite the pain, I still tried doing yard work, and one day I was doing it, and it really hurt. And I did the front yard, and I was about halfway through the backyard, and the pain it got too much. I just stopped in the middle of the yard, and I came in here and laid down in this bed behind me. And this left leg, it just hurt, and it just wouldn't quit hurting. And then the next day it was still hurting, and the next day it was still hurting. Now, whenever you go in and you got pain, they always say, what's your pain level? And it's between 1 and 10, and with 10 being the worst, like excruciating, unbearable, and 1 being not a whole lot, and 0 being none. And I tell you, when you have a 2 or 3 pain that never, ever quit, it becomes a 10. And that's what was happening there. It just wouldn't quit. And this was the lowest moment throughout this entire deal. I had a mat right down here where I did physical therapy. And I got down on that mat on my hands and knees, and I buried my face in my hands. And I was so discouraged, and I had some tears, and it was the worst moment. I mean, really dark, black moment. But I got through that, and I talked to my wife, and I said, I need to go to the emergency room. And that was the first of many ER visits. The doctor gave me some Dilaudid, and that always caused the pain to quit. Now, in a little bit, I'm going to talk about another way to make the pain quit that doesn't involve drugs, and I still use it, and it's great, and I'll be talking about that in a moment. And that was the last time I did yard work of any significance. Now, in July of 2021, the neurosurgeon ordered an MRI because the pain hadn't quit, and it showed that I herniated the disc in the classic place that you herniated it, L5-S1. And the MRI showed what's called extrusion, extrusion. What that is the goop in the disc that squirts out when it herniates, and that fills up the spinal canal, and it puts pressure on the nerves, just like we talked about before. So on December 5th of 2021, I had my discectomy, which turned out to be my first of 2 discectomies. And none of that counts about the 2 surgeries in 3 days that we're going to end up talking about in part 4. Well, right after the discectomy, for a little bit after that, it seemed to get better once the incision pain resolved and all that. I seemed to have a little less pain otherwise, but then it worsened. And it kept getting worse and worse, and eventually, as we got into 2022, my primary care physician increased my oxycodone to 120 milligrams a day. And the neurologist ordered physical therapy again, and this time it was way different and way better. And we'll pick that up in part 3. Till then, it's always good to see you.